November 8, 1942, 2:12 a.m., Richmond, California. The night air along the bay smelled of burned steel, salt water, wet concrete, machine oil, and welding flux thick enough to sting the lungs with every breath. Floodlights mounted high above the docks blasted white light through drifting fog, until the entire shipyard looked like some giant mechanical battlefield operating against time itself. Sparks cascaded from welding torches in endless showers. Rivet guns cracked like distant machine gun fire. Steel grinders screamed against metal plating, while cranes moved overhead, carrying massive prefabricated hull sections through smoke and steam rising from the docks below. Freight trains loaded with steel rolled into the yards throughout the night, while workers swarmed across unfinished cargo ships with ladders, hoses, cables, torches, and clipboards clutched beneath grease-covered gloves. Somewhere deeper in the harbor, a tugboat horn echoed through the darkness. Another Liberty ship was preparing to launch, another cargo vessel joining the endless Atlantic War. And standing near the edge of the dock with mud on his boots and exhaustion carved into the lines of his face was a man who had never built a ship before the war began. Henry Kaiser stared across the Richmond shipyards beneath drifting smoke, while welders illuminated the night around him in violent flashes of blue-white light. He looked less like a wealthy industrialist and more like an overworked foreman who had not slept properly in weeks. His heavy coat smelled faintly of cigarettes and machinery. Nearby supervisors rushed past carrying production schedules, while cranes swung steel overhead so low the cables groaned under the weight. Yet Kaiser barely noticed the chaos anymore because the chaos had become normal. The war itself had become normal. Somewhere thousands of miles away, beyond the darkness of the Pacific coast, German submarines hunted Allied shipping across the Atlantic with terrifying effectiveness. Entire convoys vanished beneath black freezing water. Oil tankers exploded into towers of fire visible for miles at sea. British cargo reserves tightened dangerously, while military planners in Washington studied shipping loss reports with growing alarm. Britain could survive bombings. Britain could survive rationing. But if the Atlantic supply line collapsed entirely, the island would slowly starve. Churchill himself later admitted the U-boat campaign frightened him more than almost anything else during the war because every tank, every aircraft engine, every shell casing, every barrel of fuel, every crate of food crossing toward Britain first had to survive the ocean. And the ocean had become a graveyard. Earlier in the war, German submariners called it the happy time. Merchant ships burned so frequently along convoy routes that sailors sometimes saw distant fires glowing on the horizon night after night. Survivors floated for hours in freezing water coated in thick black fuel oil, while rescue ships raced desperately between attacks. In some convoy battles, the Atlantic itself seemed alive with smoke, wreckage, and screams disappearing into darkness beneath storm clouds. German Admiral Karl Dönitz built his entire strategy around strangling Allied shipping faster than Britain and America could replace the losses. At first, the strategy nearly worked. Traditional shipbuilding simply moved too slowly. Cargo vessels often required months to complete. Some took over 200 days from keel laying to launch. Skilled labor shortages slowed production further. Old shipyard traditions resisted rapid change. Experienced executives insisted that ships could not be mass-produced like automobiles because maritime construction demanded craftsmanship and precision developed over generations. But Henry Kaiser looked at those traditions and saw something entirely different. Delay, inefficiency, habit disguised as necessity. He was not a naval architect, not an admiral, not even a lifelong maritime businessman. Before the war, Kaiser built roads, bridges, and giant infrastructure projects across America during the Depression. He helped construct Hoover Dam faster than experts believed possible. Everywhere he worked, he asked the same dangerous question: why does this take so long? Traditional industries hated that question because sometimes the honest answer had little to do with engineering limitations and everything to do with routine. Kaiser understood something many military planners only gradually realized during World War II. Modern industrial war was becoming a contest of scale. Germany could build exceptional submarines. America could build overwhelming quantities of everything else. Quantity itself could become a weapon powerful enough to crush even brilliant enemy tactics. Inside Richmond, the shipyards operated 24 hours a day beneath constant floodlights because the war no longer allowed ordinary schedules. Thousands of workers flooded into California from every corner of America seeking wartime jobs. Farmers from Oklahoma stood beside former factory laborers from Detroit. Women who had never touched industrial tools before the war now welded steel hull seems high above the docks. Black workers arriving from the segregated South joined production lines despite discrimination still poisoning much of American society. Teenagers lied about their ages to work overtime, while elderly men too old for military service still operated machinery because every available hand mattered now. Temporary housing projects expanded around the shipyards almost overnight. Cafeterias served meals continuously. Buses carried exhausted workers through darkness before dawn, while another shift still labored beneath floodlights inside the yards. The shipyards became cities that never truly slept. Hammers echoed all night long. Cranes moved endlessly through smoke. Welding arcs flickered against low clouds hanging above the harbor. The ground itself sometimes vibrated faintly beneath the weight of machinery operating around the clock. And towering over the chaos were giant prefabricated ship sections already assembled elsewhere before reaching the docks. That was Kaiser's real revolution. Traditional shipbuilding assembled vessels slowly from the keel upward piece by piece, like constructing giant steel cathedrals. Kaiser destroyed that rhythm completely. His yards built enormous sections simultaneously in multiple locations before transporting them toward final assembly areas where giant cranes lowered the completed pieces together like components in an industrial puzzle. Entire deckhouses arrived already wired. Engine compartments arrived partially equipped. Bulkheads, pipe systems, wall structures, and cargo sections came prepared for rapid integration. Welding crews then fused everything together at astonishing speed, while supervisors tracked schedules down to individual minutes. Traditional shipbuilders mocked the process openly. Some called Liberty ships ugly emergency constructions unworthy of proper maritime standards. Others privately referred to them as Kaiser coffins, because welded hulls sometimes developed dangerous cracks under extreme stress. But month after month, the production numbers became impossible to ignore. Launch schedules collapsed dramatically. Output surged. New cargo ships appeared faster than Germany expected possible. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic waves, U-boat commanders started noticing something deeply unsettling. Convoys that should have remained crippled somehow kept recovering. Sink 10 ships and 20 more eventually arrived. Sink 30 and 40 replaced them. The ocean itself seemed to generate American cargo vessels endlessly. Dönitz still believed submarines could win the Atlantic War, but the mathematics slowly began shifting against him. Reports reaching Berlin described American shipyards operating at speeds previously considered absurd. Intelligence officers initially suspected propaganda exaggeration, yet the evidence kept growing. New cargo fleets continued appearing across convoy routes despite heavy submarine activity. American production capacity expanded relentlessly. Meanwhile, inside Richmond, workers pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, attempting to meet impossible schedules demanded by Henry Kaiser personally. Welding crews competed against each other unofficially to complete sections faster. Crane operators maneuvered giant steel components through darkness with terrifying precision, while supervisors screamed production updates over loudspeakers at 3 in the morning. Kaiser walked the docks constantly beneath floodlights carrying production reports smudged with grease and rainwater. Faster, more steel, more workers, more hulls. Somewhere out in the Atlantic, sailors were still dying while waiting for ships that did not yet exist. Then came the challenge that stunned the shipbuilding world. Kaiser announced his yards intended to construct an entire Liberty ship in less than 5 days. Newspapers treated the claim like a publicity stunt. Traditional maritime executives openly laughed. Engineers warned privately that rushing production so aggressively risked catastrophic structural failures at sea. Even Navy officials expressed skepticism. A cargo vessel stretching more than 400 feet long and weighing thousands of tons could not simply appear overnight according to every accepted principle of ship construction. But on November 8th, workers gathered around the skeletal frame of a ship named SS Robert E. Peary, while reporters prepared cameras beneath glaring floodlights. Welders waited beside stacked steel sections. Crane operators sat ready high above the docks, inside swinging cabs overlooking the harbor. Official timers checked stopwatches. Henry Kaiser stood near the unfinished hull, silently watching smoke drift through the freezing air. Then the clock started. Sparks exploded through darkness as giant prefabricated sections descended toward the keel blocks below. Workers moved with terrifying speed. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Welders crouched beside seams the instant steel touched into place, while torches ignited arcs so bright they transformed the shipyard into violent flashes of artificial lightning. Trucks rattled between assembly stations carrying hoses, cables, welding rods, fuel cylinders, and replacement equipment, while foremen shouted through loudspeakers above the thunder of machinery. Coffee carts became crowded with exhausted workers already awake for nearly 20 hours before the challenge even fully began. The entire operation felt less like construction and more like a military assault against time itself. By sunrise, the skeleton of the Peary already towered over the dock. Reporters arriving at Richmond rubbed their eyes in disbelief because they expected ceremony rather than industrial madness. Thousands of workers flooded across the partially completed vessel, carrying tools and materials through corridors that had not existed hours earlier. Pipefitters crawled through cramped compartments tightening valves, while crane operators lowered engines into place with astonishing accuracy. Metal grinders screamed, steam hissed, burned steel mixed with salt water drifting from the bay. Many laborers building the ship had never worked in maritime industries before the war. Women climbed scaffolding carrying welding masks, while teenagers hauled cables across slippery decks beneath floodlights still operating during daylight, because the yards no longer paused long enough to power them down. Every hour mattered because somewhere in the Atlantic convoy sailors still froze to death in burning water waiting for supplies these shipyards desperately tried to deliver. By the second night, workers entered something close to delirium from exhaustion. Eyes bloodshot, hands blistered beneath gloves, supervisors gulping coffee at 2 in the morning while steel walls enclosed new compartments around them almost faster than human minds could process the transformation. Rumors spread across the yards that they might actually succeed. Less than 5 days. Impossible, yet somehow becoming real beneath the floodlights. Then came the final push, November 12th. Fog rolled across the harbor while exhausted crews completed final inspections beneath giant cranes looming overhead like mechanical towers. Weld seams still glowed faint orange in places. Tugboats waited in dark water nearby. Henry Kaiser stood near the launch platform with grease on his coat and almost no sleep behind his eyes. 4 days, 15 hours. The SS Robert E. Peary slid into San Francisco Bay, while workers erupted into exhausted cheers beneath clouds of steam and smoke. And in that moment, something changed permanently. Because if one cargo ship could be built this fast, then Germany's entire submarine strategy suddenly faced a terrifying new reality. The Atlantic Ocean, January 1943. Midnight storms rolled across black water so violently that entire convoys disappeared behind walls of freezing spray, while merchant sailors fought to remain standing on ice-covered decks beneath screaming winds. Waves smashed against Liberty's ship hulls hard enough to make steel groan through every compartment. Cargo chains rattled below deck. Boilers thundered deep inside engine rooms glowing red with unbearable heat, while above them lookouts scanned darkness through freezing rain searching for shapes no sailor ever wanted to see. Periscopes, torpedo wakes, the silhouette of a surfaced U-boat moving between convoy columns under moonlight. Somewhere inside the storm, Dozens of cargo ships pushed eastward toward Britain carrying tanks, fuel, wheat, aircraft parts, locomotives, medical supplies, ammunition crates, bulldozers, spare engines, radio equipment, and entire disassembled factories packed into steel holds stacked floor to ceiling with the machinery of modern war. The convoy moved slowly because Liberty ships were not fast vessels. 11 knots on a good day, heavy, box-shaped, crude in appearance. Traditional naval officers sometimes mocked them openly. Sailors joked they were too ugly to sink. Yet despite their awkward design, these ships carried something more important than elegance. They carried survival. Every convoy reaching Britain meant another month the island nation stayed alive beneath German pressure. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic waves, U-boat commanders still hunted relentlessly trying to stop that flow before America's industrial machine became unstoppable. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lehmann stood inside the control room of U-96, listening to sonar reports through stale diesel-filled air, while condensation dripped constantly from steel pipes overhead. Red emergency lighting cast ghostly shadows across exhausted sailors packed shoulder to shoulder inside cramped compartments that smelled permanently of machine oil, sweat, cigarettes, and recycled air. The submarine rolled beneath heavy seas, while electric motors hummed softly below deck. Earlier in the war, Lehmann felt almost invincible crossing Atlantic patrol routes. British convoys once appeared vulnerable and poorly protected. American coastal defenses initially looked disorganized after the United States entered the war. Merchant ships burned so frequently that German submarine crews sometimes surfaced at night simply to watch the horizon glowing orange from distant sinkings. But by 1943, something had changed. Convoys grew larger. Escorts grew more aggressive. Aircraft appeared farther from land than before. And most disturbing of all, American cargo ship losses no longer seemed permanent. Every time Germany sank vessels, new ones appeared almost immediately. Endless gray Liberty ships moving east through storms and darkness, as though the ocean itself manufactured them. Lehmann studied convoy reports with growing frustration, because the arithmetic no longer favored Germany the way it once had. Sink 3 ships tonight, and 6 replacements eventually arrived. Sink 10 and 20 more appeared behind them. The Allied merchant fleet no longer behaved like a fragile system vulnerable to collapse. It behaved like an industrial organism, regenerating faster than submarines could destroy it. Back in Washington, military planners studying shipping statistics slowly realized Henry Kaiser's revolution represented something far larger than efficient shipbuilding. It represented industrial momentum on a scale unprecedented in modern warfare. Liberty ship launches accelerated across American coastlines with astonishing speed. Richmond, Portland, Baltimore, New Orleans, Brunswick. Entire shipyards thundered day and night beneath floodlights while trains unloaded steel continuously beside docks overflowing with unfinished hulls. Some yards launched multiple cargo ships in a single week. Others shattered previous production records repeatedly until newspapers struggled to keep track of the numbers anymore. What once sounded impossible became routine. Another launch, another hull sliding into water, another convoy forming for the Atlantic crossing. The shipyards themselves transformed into living mechanical cities. Cafeterias operated 24 hours a day, feeding exhausted workers staggering through double shifts beneath layers of grease and smoke. Childcare centers opened near production areas because thousands of women now worked industrial jobs, once considered exclusively male professions. Housing shortages became severe around Richmond as wartime migration flooded California with laborers from every corner of America. Black families arriving from the segregated South often encountered racism and overcrowded housing, even while the shipyards desperately depended on their labor. Yet despite tensions and exhaustion, the work continued because the stakes remained terrifyingly clear. Delay meant fewer ships. Fewer ships meant fewer supplies reaching Allied armies. Fewer supplies meant soldiers dying somewhere overseas waiting for ammunition, fuel, or food. In Britain, Dockworkers unloading Liberty ships beneath blackout conditions watched the transformation firsthand. Earlier in the war, every cargo arrival felt precious because replacement schedules remained uncertain. By 1943, the docks overflowed with American shipments. Cranes unloaded Sherman tanks from cargo holds while railcars carried endless supplies toward airfields, military depots, and factories across the country. British civilians standing in ration lines still faced hardship, but the deeper fear of complete logistical collapse slowly faded. The convoys kept coming. More fuel, more food, more trucks, more steel. Germany could still sink ships, but it could no longer stop the flow. Churchill understood the significance immediately. The Battle of the Atlantic was not merely about naval combat. It was about industrial endurance. Britain needed shipping capacity greater than German destruction rates. Henry Kaiser's shipyards helped make that possible. Meanwhile, inside Richmond, the pressure intensified further. The SS Robert E. Peary launch became legendary across American newspapers, but Kaiser never viewed it as a one-time publicity event. He wanted to destroy psychological limitations inside industrial thinking itself. Once workers believed ships could appear in days rather than months, expectations changed permanently. Production systems reorganized around acceleration. Suppliers adapted. Transportation networks adapted. Entire manufacturing philosophies evolved beneath wartime urgency. Kaiser pushed constantly for faster assembly methods, better crane coordination, more prefabrication, less wasted motion. He walked the shipyards personally through rain and smoke, demanding impossible schedules, while exhausted supervisors tried desperately to keep pace. Some workers admired him passionately. Others considered him relentless almost to the point of obsession. But nobody denied results. New Liberty ships flooded into service so rapidly that even coastal residents living near the shipyards eventually stopped attending launch ceremonies because launches happened too frequently to feel extraordinary anymore. Somewhere in the Atlantic, merchant marine sailor Daniel O'Connor leaned against a freezing rail aboard the Liberty ship SS Jeremiah Clark, while convoy escorts fired star shells into storm clouds searching for submarines reported nearby. O'Connor was 21 years old. Before the war, he stocked shelves at a grocery store in Boston. Now he crossed oceans aboard what sailors bitterly called floating targets. Liberty ships carried defensive guns, but against torpedoes and storms they remained vulnerable. Earlier in the war, O'Connor watched another cargo vessel disappear beside his convoy after a nighttime torpedo strike erupted into a massive fireball, illuminating black waves covered with burning fuel oil. He still remembered hearing men scream in the darkness long after the ship itself vanished beneath the sea. Those sounds followed sailors everywhere. Yet despite fear, the convoys continued because they had to continue. Modern war consumed staggering quantities of resources daily. Ammunition vanished by the ton during artillery barrages. Tanks devoured fuel relentlessly. Aircraft required endless spare parts. Armies needed food, medicine, trucks, uniforms, engineering equipment, radios, locomotives, and replacement machinery constantly. Logistics became warfare itself. Liberty ships became the bloodstream carrying that logistical power across oceans. And because America could now build them faster than Germany could sink them, the strategic balance slowly shifted. Admiral Karl Dönitz studied monthly shipping reports with growing alarm. German submarines remained deadly, but deadliness alone no longer guaranteed victory. Submarine warfare depended on mathematics. Merchant losses had to exceed replacement rates consistently enough to cripple Allied operations. Instead, the opposite began happening. American production surged while escort technology improved simultaneously. Radar-equipped aircraft hunted surface U-boats even at night. Long-range patrol bombers closed the mid-Atlantic air gap submarines once exploited safely. Escort carriers launched aircraft directly from convoy routes. Destroyers equipped with improved sonar attacked aggressively beneath freezing storms, while code-breaking operations increasingly exposed German submarine deployments. The hunters themselves gradually became hunted. German crews noticed the psychological shift first. Earlier in the war, submariners stalked frightened convoys with confidence. By 1943, many patrols felt increasingly dangerous. Aircraft appeared suddenly overhead, even far from land. Escort ships pursued contacts relentlessly with depth charges, shaking submarines violently enough to burst pipes and extinguish lights. Some U-boat crews spent terrifying hours trapped underwater listening to propellers circling above while seawater leaked through damaged seals and batteries, released choking chlorine fumes into cramped compartments. Yet even while submarine losses mounted, Germany still hoped advanced tactics and new technologies could reverse the trend. Hitler demanded continued pressure against Allied shipping because he understood the Atlantic remained critical. But every month, American shipyards launched more Liberty vessels into service, while Germany struggled merely to maintain submarine numbers under growing Allied bombing campaigns. Back in Richmond, Maria Gutierrez climbed scaffolding 6 stories above the docks during a freezing February rainstorm, while welding seams along another cargo hull destined for Atlantic convoys. Sparks exploded around her mast, while giant cranes moved sections overhead through smoke and darkness. Below her, thousands of workers crossed the yards beneath floodlights, reflecting off wet steel and muddy concrete. She had arrived from agricultural labor before the war. Now her welds might determine whether some future convoy survived rough seas or torpedo damage long enough to reach Britain. Many workers never saw combat directly, but the war surrounded them invisibly through telegrams, newspaper casualty lists, and constant reminders that soldiers overseas depended on their speed. Some nights Maria returned to crowded worker housing, barely able to feel her hands after 12-hour shifts gripping welding equipment. Yet buses carried her back before dawn because production never truly stopped anymore. Richmond itself seemed to pulse with wartime urgency. Freight trains unloaded steel continuously. Cafeterias overflowed with exhausted laborers. Ship horns echoed across the harbor beneath smoke drifting through floodlights. Another hull always waited. Another convoy always formed. Another Atlantic crossing always began somewhere beyond the horizon. And slowly, relentlessly, the realization spread through Allied leadership that Henry Kaiser's industrial gamble had become one of the most important strategic revolutions of the entire war. Germany built extraordinary weapons. America built overwhelming systems. Liberty ships symbolized that difference perfectly. Not elegant, not glamorous, simply producible at impossible scale. And as 1943 progressed, that scale started crushing the Atlantic War beneath sheer industrial weight. May 28, 1944, 4:46 a.m. Southampton, England. Fog rolled low across crowded harbors where thousands of ships waited beneath blackout conditions, stretching toward the horizon like an entire floating continent preparing for war. Liberty ships sat heavy in dark water loaded with mountains of cargo stacked deep inside steel holds. Sherman tanks chained beside crates of artillery shells. Fuel drums packed beneath camouflage nets. Bulldozers, medical supplies, portable bridges, locomotives, barbed wire, trucks, radio equipment, blood plasma, field kitchens, engineering tools, and enough ammunition to sustain armies for months once the invasion began. Dockworkers moved under hooded flashlights through freezing sea air, while military police directed endless convoys of trucks toward embarkation zones hidden beneath camouflage. Somewhere offshore, destroyers prowled silently through the mist while barrage balloons floated above the coastline like giant gray ghosts guarding Britain from enemy aircraft. And tied among this colossal armada were the same blunt box-shaped cargo vessels many traditional naval experts once mocked as ugly emergency constructions. Liberty ships, hundreds of them, floating steel arteries feeding the greatest amphibious invasion in human history. Thousands of American soldiers sleeping in camps across southern England barely understood how completely their fate depended on ships like these because Operation Overlord would not be won through bravery alone. It would be won through logistics. Every bullet fired in Normandy first had to cross an ocean. Every tank advancing inland required fuel delivered through cargo holds. Every medical station, every artillery battery, every ration tin, every replacement engine, every gallon of aviation fuel depended on ships continuing to arrive without interruption. Germany once believed submarines could make that impossible. Henry Kaiser helped prove otherwise. Across Britain, entire rail networks strained beneath the flood of American supplies pouring into the country during 1944. Dockworkers unloading Liberty ships around the clock watched the invasion gather momentum physically in front of them as mountains of military equipment accumulated near the southern coast. Tanks lined roads beneath camouflage nets. Fuel depots expanded across farmland. Endless supply dumps appeared near ports preparing for the assault against Fortress Europe. Allied planners understood something horrifyingly simple about modern mechanized warfare. Armies stopped moving the instant logistics failed. Ammunition vanished rapidly during combat. Fuel disappeared into tank engines almost instantly. Trucks broke down. Aircraft required constant maintenance. Men needed food, water, medicine, clothing, replacement weapons, and shelter every single day regardless of battlefield conditions. The invasion of France would consume supplies at rates almost impossible to comprehend. Only an industrial shipping network operating continuously across the Atlantic could sustain such an operation. And by 1944, that network existed largely because Liberty ships flooded the oceans faster than Germany could destroy them. In Berlin, German intelligence officers studied aerial reconnaissance photographs of crowded British harbors with growing alarm. Cargo ships packed the coastline endlessly. Military traffic clogged roads across southern England. Luftwaffe pilots reported seeing entire ports transformed into giant supply depots overflowing with Allied equipment. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel inspected coastal defenses across Normandy while warning repeatedly that Allied industrial superiority threatened catastrophe. He understood modern warfare intimately. Germany might still possess skilled soldiers and formidable defensive positions, but the Allies now possessed something potentially more dangerous: endless replacement capacity. Every destroyed truck could be replaced, every lost tank replaced, every damaged airfield rebuilt. Behind the invasion stood the industrial weight of the United States operating at terrifying scale. And somewhere inside that industrial machinery stood Henry Kaiser's shipyards, launching cargo vessels with relentless efficiency month after month. Meanwhile, the Battle of the Atlantic itself continued beneath freezing storms and moonless skies, despite Allied advantages increasing steadily. German submarines still prowled convoy routes, desperately searching for opportunities to cripple Allied shipping before the invasion began. Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Wolfram stood inside U-758 during a violent North Atlantic storm, listening to sonar pings echo through the hull, while seawater leaked from valves rattling beneath heavy waves. Earlier in the war, submarine commanders hunted merchant fleets with confidence. Now many patrols felt almost suicidal. Radar-equipped aircraft appeared suddenly from darkness. Escort destroyers attacked contacts aggressively using improved sonar and depth charges powerful enough to crack internal piping inside submerged submarines. Convoys themselves seemed endless. Wolfram watched through his periscope one freezing night as dozens upon dozens of Liberty ships pushed eastward beneath escort screens, while aircraft circled overhead through low cloud cover. Sink one vessel and another replaced it. Sink 5 and 10 followed behind. Germany no longer fought fragile supply lines. Germany fought industrial regeneration itself. Back in Richmond, the shipyard still thundered day and night despite America already flooding the world with cargo vessels. Floodlights illuminated smoke drifting above cranes swinging steel sections across muddy docks. Cafeterias served coffee at 3 in the morning, while exhausted workers staggered between shifts coated in grease and welding dust. Women nicknamed Rosies climbed scaffolding carrying torches, while foremen shouted schedules through loudspeakers echoing across the harbor. Some workers barely remembered peacetime anymore because wartime production had consumed daily life completely. Childcare centers operated near the yards because mothers welded ship hulls during 12-hour shifts. Housing shortages packed entire families into temporary buildings constructed almost overnight around Richmond. Yet despite exhaustion and accidents and endless pressure, the work continued because everyone understood soldiers overseas depended on this machinery operating without pause. Henry Kaiser still pushed relentlessly for greater speed, more prefabrication, better workflow, less wasted motion. He viewed delays almost as personal insults. Traditional shipbuilding culture valued craftsmanship and patience. Kaiser valued throughput, continuous movement. The Liberty Ship program represented more than engineering innovation. It represented a psychological transformation in industrial thinking itself. Once America realized ships could be mass-produced rapidly, expectations changed permanently across wartime manufacturing. Factories accelerated, suppliers accelerated, transportation accelerated. The nation itself became an enormous coordinated system optimized for sustaining global war. On June 6, 1944, Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy beneath machine gun fire, while naval artillery thundered across the French coastline, and paratroopers scattered through hedgerows in darkness and confusion. Omaha Beach became a slaughterhouse of smoke, blood, surf, and exploding steel. Men drowned beneath heavy equipment packs before even reaching shore. Others died tangled in underwater obstacles, while German artillery ripped landing craft apart around them. Yet behind the chaos, another quieter operation unfolded continuously beyond the beaches. Liberty ships already approached the invasion zone carrying reinforcements and supplies toward France. Cargo crews worked around the clock unloading ammunition, fuel, trucks, engineering equipment, medical supplies, and replacement machinery into temporary mulberry harbors floating off the coast. Without those shipments, the invasion would have stalled almost immediately. Armies do not survive on courage alone. They survive on logistics, and logistics arrived aboard Liberty ships. German commanders watching Allied expansion across Normandy slowly realized a horrifying truth. Even enormous casualties failed to slow Allied momentum significantly because replacements kept arriving endlessly. More tanks, more aircraft, more ammunition, more fuel, more troops. Behind every offensive stood the industrial power of American manufacturing crossing oceans through cargo convoys. Germany could no longer meaningfully disrupt. In many ways, the Atlantic War had already been decided before D-Day began. It had been decided in steel mills, rail yards, factories, and floodlit shipyards where workers assembled cargo fleets faster than submarines could sink them. By late 1944, Allied armies surged across France, while Soviet offensives crushed German formations advancing west from the Eastern Front simultaneously. Hitler still raged about miracle weapons and final offensives, but many German officers privately recognized reality. Germany faced enemies capable of replacing losses almost indefinitely. One Panther tank might outperform certain Allied vehicles tactically. One experienced submarine crew might destroy multiple cargo ships. None of it mattered enough against overwhelming industrial capacity operating across entire continents. Liberty ships symbolized that imbalance perfectly. Slow, crude, unbeautiful, yet unstoppable through sheer quantity. Meanwhile, the sailors aboard those cargo vessels continued facing terrifying conditions despite Allied superiority increasing. Merchant mariners crossed storm-filled oceans loaded with fuel and ammunition while mines, submarines, aircraft, and weather threatened them constantly. Liberty ships rolled violently through North Atlantic storms while ice coated decks thick enough to trap sailors beneath freezing waves if they slipped. Torpedo strikes still occurred suddenly without warning. Fires aboard ammunition, ships sometimes vaporized entire crews instantly. Yet convoy routes remained active continuously because modern war consumed resources endlessly. Merchant marine casualty rates became among the highest of any American service branch during the conflict, though history often remembered them less prominently than combat soldiers. Men like Daniel O'Connor crossed the Atlantic repeatedly despite nightmares following every voyage. Some sailors listened helplessly to survivors screaming in freezing water after torpedo attacks because convoy orders prohibited stopping during submarine threats. Those memories never disappeared completely after the war ended. Then, finally came 1945. Allied bombers devastated German industry beneath endless air raids while Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin through burning cities filled with refugees fleeing collapsing fronts. American troops crossed the Rhine. British and Canadian armies pushed deeper into northern Germany. The Third Reich itself began disintegrating under military pressure from every direction simultaneously. And still Liberty ships kept moving. Fuel for tanks, food for liberated populations, medical supplies for overflowing hospitals, engineering equipment for destroyed bridges and railways. Cargo remained the invisible bloodstream of victory until the very end. On August 14, 1945, sirens exploded across Richmond Harbor as news spread that Japan had surrendered. Workers poured from shipyards beneath floodlit cranes, standing motionless for one of the first times in years. Tugboats blasted horns across San Francisco Bay, while welders embraced strangers through tears and exhaustion. Cafeterias overflowed with celebration. Radios crackled through open windows, repeating the same unbelievable words again and again. The war was over. Henry Kaiser stood near the docks watching thousands celebrate beneath silent cranes, overlooking empty launch berths where unfinished hulls still rested beside dark water. For years, the shipyards operated like industrial battlefields without pause. Now suddenly the machine stopped, yet the legacy remained impossible to erase. More than 2,700 Liberty ships had been built during the war, carrying roughly 75% of all Allied cargo transported by sea. Together, they hauled over 180 million tons of supplies across hostile oceans. Tanks, fuel, ammunition, food, entire armies, entire invasions. Entire nations sustained through steel hulls, mass-produced faster than the world believed possible. Henry Kaiser never stormed beaches with a rifle. He never commanded fleets in combat. Yet his shipyards helped drown Germany's submarine campaign beneath overwhelming industrial force. The lesson reshaped modern warfare permanently. Wars between industrial nations are not won solely through battlefield brilliance. They are won through systems capable of producing, transporting, replacing, and sustaining destruction longer than the enemy can endure. Germany could sink ships. America could build them faster. In the end, that brutal equation helped decide the outcome of World War II itself.